I don't, here on the Lunduke Journal, typically talk about TempleOS. And I've had many requests over the years to spend a little time talking about TempleOS because it's such a fascinating and, well, quite frankly, bizarre operating system that people want to hear me talk about it. People want to know more about it. They want to know what I think about it. And I've avoided it for a very wide variety of reasons. But now something has happened over the last year or so that has made it so there is some reason to talk about it now. There is a new fork of TempleOS. People are developing on it now called ZealOS. ZealOS or ZealOS, ZealOS. And they're continuing development of TempleOS in what I kind of consider to be very weird ways. And so I wanted to talk about it a little bit. So let's dive into it. But first, before we get to ZealOS, let's talk about the history here. Because the history of TempleOS is somewhat important in understanding why ZealOS is weird. So let's go back to 2005. TempleOS itself is created by Terry Davis. And TempleOS went through a couple of name changes and a couple of design changes early on. And he continued development on it. And Terry Davis is kind of an interesting guy. We'll get into that. But here's the thing. Here's what TempleOS has for a feature set. Okay, and this is, again, all started really back in 2005. A multitasking, not a preemptive multitasking, but multitasking, multi-core system that is ring 0 only, meaning basically everything runs more than root, right? It's like DOS, right? So everything has hardware access. It's ring 0. It's the lowest level. That's the whole point. The video resolution is 640 by 480. Running at 16 colors. It has single voice audio, so PC speaker only. No networking. And here's the wild thing about all this. Some of the core features that we just talked about, Terry Davis, the creator, has stated that those features were dictated by God, that God revealed them to Terry through a series of visions. Now, this to make this clear, Terry wrote what was called the TempleOS Charter, and I'm just going to read a few parts of it. There's like I want to say like a 12-point charter of TempleOS. But the preamble runs as this. TempleOS is God's official temple. God said to use 640 by 480 16-color graphics, and God said to have a single audio voice that is just like how he specified qubits in the Bible. Okay, this is what Terry says, and then there's a list of, I want to say, about a dozen items. Basically, you could call these the commandments of TempleOS or the amendments to TempleOS. But 4, 5, and 6 are the key ones I want to call out here. Number 4, TempleOS will never have networking. So malware is less of an issue. That's certainly true. Number 5, TempleOS will always have one video mode, 640 by 480 by 16 colors, unless that mode becomes unavailable on computers in the future. And number 6, TempleOS will always just have PC speaker sound. So this is what TempleOS looks like. It is a unique system that looks, how do I put this? Awful. It looks awful. And it doesn't look terrible because it's 640 by 480 at 16 colors, right? I mean, yes, those limitations, only PC speaker, only 16 colors, 640 by 40, that's limiting. But you can do some beautiful things with that. Terry's design aesthetic. Terry was not a designer. He was a programmer, right? And he did, some of the designs that he made were awfully good for a developer who wasn't good at design. But the way that you interact with this system, here's another screenshot, is both fascinating and horrific. Like, it's the UI is just cumbersome, to say the least. It is it kind of burns your eyeballs. Like there are operating systems in this world that I dislike the user interface of, right? Like Windows 1.0. Windows 1.0 in color mode is the most hideous looking operating system on planet Earth. You put Windows 1.0 in black and white mode and it actually kind of looks a little bit classy. TempleOS, the colors make it worse, but even in black and white mode, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense. Like it's very strangely designed. The architecture is strange. I know there's been many people out there who have done reviews of the OS and the source code and whatnot and talked about how impressive it is. And to a certain level, it is impressive because it's an operating system and the man did a lot of work on it. But it is, in my opinion, one of the worst designed systems I can possibly imagine. Now, flash forward to 2013. And at this point, Terry Davis had already made a lot of statements. With keeping this a very family-friendly show, I can't make most of those statements because most of them were about how horrific many different ethnicities are, many different people of various religions are. He had a very distinct hatred of Jewish people, and he was a very interesting guy in that regard. And then in 2013, he made us the following statement, and he put this front and center on his website. God's temple is finished. Now, God kills CIA until it spreads. I mean, that's a statement right there. He didn't like the CIA. He didn't like the CIA at all. There was a lot of groups of people Terry Davis did not like. He just didn't. And Terry Davis, was, clearly a troubled guy, right? I mean, that always was the case. He suffered from schizophrenia, I believe, and he was a troubled guy. Just the same. And despite the fact that he does not approve of Jewish people, of which I am one of, I reached out to Terry. I was very nice to Terry. We had some emails, and I talked to him. I'm like, look, Terry, I'm doing some shows. This was back in 2017, and where I'm talking to some hobbyist operating system developers, people building fringe or hobbyist or alternative operating systems, ones that don't necessarily have a huge user base but are possibly growing. There was a couple of them at the time that I was looking at, and I was doing a couple of interviews at the time about those. And I reached out to Terry about those, and Terry made it clear that he was very well aware of who I was. I can't really reveal too much of that particular part of the conversation because, again, this is a family-friendly show. But Terry made one statement. I made the mistake of using the word amateur operating systems in telling him some of the other operating systems I was interviewing people about, right? I didn't mean that his work was amateurish, but I used hobbyist, amateur, and alternative operating systems, right? 'Cause that's what we're talking about. Terry did not like that I used that word, and he replied to me, and this is the last email I ever got from Terry. The entire email was this: "No, I am pro. No time for amateurs." So that was 2017. That was the last time that I had any email correspondence with Terry. And then the next year in 2018, Terry died after he was hit by a train in northern Oregon, along the northern Oregon border. Tragic, right? It's always terribly tragic. It seemed like Terry took his own life, and he was a pretty troubled guy. He had a hard time, and wish him well wherever he's at now. But his work lived on. In 2019, the very next year, TempleOS got forked. by a project that codenamed itself ZealOS. So it took the source code, which was all public domain, because that was also a part of the charter of TempleOS, was that it was public domain. And Zenith came along and took that public domain source code and started adding features to it. Well, what features were they adding? Well, VBE video modes, which allowed for different resolutions beyond 640 by 480. It allowed them to bring the whole system up to a 60 frames per second. They were working towards, but were not fully finished working on a networking stack and 32-bit color. Now, here's something to think about. Those features contradict the features that Terry Davis say God revealed to him would need to be the features of the system. Remember, the God specifically told Terry, according to Terry, that it needs to be 640 by 480, 16 colors, PC speaker. I don't know if God specifically said no networking, but Terry wanted no networking, and I don't know if Terry felt like that was that needed to be part of it. But being that as it's may, would Terry Davis, the creator of TempleOS, consider these new features to be blasphemous? Would they be defiling his temple? What would he think about that? I mean, considering that TempleOS, I don't want to say that Terry's work was pointless, because it's not. I'm a huge fan of people creating hobbyist systems like this. Unique and interesting and different systems, and TempleOS certainly is that. So I think there's real value in the work that Terry did, both for himself and for others. But considering how spiritually important this specific feature set of the OS was, and considering that there really isn't a lot of value in the system itself being modified. I mean, there's no enterprises based on TempleOS. There's no hobbyist market based on TempleOS. TempleOS is a curiosity for the vast majority of people that even know it exists. And now in 2019, a group came along, I think just one or two devs or something, but they came along and they made a new version of it that wasn't 640 by 480, that wasn't 16 colors. What do you think about that? What would Terry think about that? I don't know. I doubt he would have had nice things to say. And this is what that looked like. This is what that ZealOS looked like. It went for a much darker theme. Let me go back up here. A much darker theme. I mean, it's a little easier on the eyes. I'll give you that. But it also, I mean, you can see where it clearly was inspired by TempleOS. It is TempleOS, but they changed the look and feel of it. Yeah, fascinating. Well, that really didn't seem to go anywhere, right? So ZealOS fizzled out. And then in July of 2021, last year, ZealOS is then created as a fork of ZenithOS, right? So Temple gets forked to Zenith, and Zenith gets forked to ZealOS. And this is what it looks like right now. Again, it's TempleOS with a dark theme, optional. This is also ZealOS. It's just a terrible looking system. And you know, they're continuing to, in some ways, make it look a little bit prettier. In other ways, just kind of make it look a little bit darker. I don't know that I don't understand. You can go to zealous.net, ZealOS.net to check it out. And this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like drawing squares on the screen. And it's not that it's not fascinating, but I don't understand. I don't understand why someone would take a passion project that someone viewed as a religious thing and modify it to be contradictory to the religious views of that person, when that passion project doesn't really have any value outside of being a religious project for that person. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. That confuses the dickens out of me. I don't understand that. And again, I mean, I don't want to speak ill of the dead. Terry was a very angry man that disliked people like me, right? So Terry disliked people like me, but just the same, I want to be respectful of the man's work, of the man's beliefs. So I say that this is supposed to be a religious thing for him. Maybe we should just let it be and preserve it and say, okay, this is a fascinating snapshot into an attempt at creating an operating system with a very specific and rigid set of requirements that were, according to its creator, proclaimed by God. That's fascinating. It's fascinating on so many levels. And now that it's continuing it on, how truly and utterly bizarre. What a bizarre thing to spend your time on. I mean, I'm sure the developers working on ZealOS, just like ZenithOS before them, were talented. I'm sure they're talented people. Right? Personally, I'd prefer them to, I don't know, continue Temple in using the charter that Terry laid out, or forget Temple entirely and go make something else. Because Temple, that's not a good foundation to build something cool and new upon. Anyway, go check it out at ZealOS.net. You can grab it. You can look at the work they're doing, check out their screenshots. I find it fascinating. I would love to hear what all of you think of the projects. It truly is interesting. It's interesting to look at. It's interesting to think about. It's interesting to see the motivation of a great many people of why they do what they do. The whole thing's interesting. The history is interesting. It's fascinating. I don't think I'll be installing ZealOS or any similar systems based on Temple on my production or gaming machines anytime soon. At least not outside of a virtual machine, just to look at it and go, what in tarnations is that? Anyway, go on over to lunduk.substack.com or lunduk.locals.com. Check out all the work I do. Check out all the videos and the articles and the satire pieces and the comic strips and the books. You get so many things. You subscribe over there. It'd make you happy. It'd fill you with joy. Let me pull up the schedule here because we've got a whole lot coming down the line. It's 2022, in case you're watching this like in the year 2050 or something like that. These are 2022 events. On December 3rd, I believe that's Saturday, we're having a video hangout for all founding members and lifetime subscribers. You can go on over there, and we're just going to hang out and relax. I'll be sending an email out to everyone about that here shortly. We do those, once a month, sometimes once or twice a month, where we just get together and talk about nerdy things as a kind of a community. And the rest of the time, we also just hang out at lunduk.locals.com, chat with each other, and goof off and all that good stuff. On December 7th, which is a week from this coming Wednesday, starts PDA week. So we're going to talk about all things personal digital assistants, TempleOS devices and Newtons and Pocket PC and everything, Scions. We're going to talk about it all, the Sharp Zaurus, the Nokia N810 and the Mamo devices. There's so many interesting and fascinating PDA and PDA-like devices that have existed over the years. And some people are digging their old machines out from their drawers that haven't been powered on in ages. Some folks are loading up emulators on their Android and iOS devices. There's a couple of really good TempleOS emulators on the web. And I'll provide links for things. So go over and join up at lunduk.locals.com. Think of lunduk.locals.com like Twitter, only without any of the bad stuff. It's just happy, family-friendly, politics-free, troll-free nerdiness. It's glorious. So go hang out with us over there, and that'll be a ton of fun. And then in January January 4th, looking a little ways out now, is 8-Bit Computer Week. So we're talking Apple IIs and Commodore 64s, Ataris, Z80s, all sorts of 8-bit computer systems. Come and join us, hang out with us, and we'll be emulators. People will be firing up their retro hardware, all sorts of stuff. Retro gaming, probably mostly in emulators, but still a ton of 8-bit fun. So come join us, hang out with us. It's going to be a blast, and I will see you all over on those websites. See you later, everybody.